Welcome to this deep dive, into the work of Brené Brown.
Oh, yeah.
I'm so excited to dig into her ideas today. I know you're curious to learn more about her too, and
Yeah.
we've got some great material, to work with.
Yeah, for sure.
Key insights from a podcast episode
Okay.
that I think will be really valuable for us. You've probably heard some of her sound bites floating around, like,
Right.
lean in or,
Yeah.
um, but trust me, there's so much more to discover,
Oh, absolutely.
like beyond those catchy
So
phrases.
much depth to her work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that really stood out to me is how Brown takes this idea of vulnerability,
Hmm.
which we're often told to overcome,
Yeah. Right.
and kind of flips it on its head
Yeah.
and says that it's actually the key to a more courageous and fulfilling life.
It is pretty counterintuitive,
It is.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like how is that even possible?
Well, we're conditioned to think of vulnerability as weakness. But her research shows that when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
we actually open ourselves up to deeper connection and greater courage.
It's true.
And in fact, she even argues that vulnerability is the birthplace of joy,
Wow.
creativity, and love.
That's amazing.
It is powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But how does that actually work?
Right.
You know,
Good question.
what's the mechanism there?
Well, think about a time when you felt really seen and understood by someone.
Okay.
Chances are you felt safe enough to be vulnerable with them,
Okay.
to let them see your imperfections, your fears, your
Yeah.
doubts.
Yeah.
And in that vulnerability,
Yeah.
something amazing happens.
Okay.
We find the courage to be ourselves,
Mm.
to step outside of that fear of judgment,
Okay.
and to live more authentically.
I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
It's like when we hide our vulnerability, we're also hiding parts of ourselves.
Right.
And that takes so much energy
It does.
and creates distance in our relationships.
Yeah. Exactly. And that fear of being judged or rejected,
Yeah.
it keeps us playing small.
Yeah, that's true.
But when we embrace vulnerability,
Mhm.
we step into our full selves, imperfections, and
Right.
paradoxically, that's what allows us to be truly brave.
So it's like by allowing ourselves to be seen,
Yes.
we're actually freeing ourselves
Yeah.
from this trap of trying to be perfect.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
So what are we missing out on by
Yeah. It's a great question.
trying to present this perfect, polished version of ourselves
Yeah.
all the time?
That's the question Brown encourages us to really grapple with, because the truth is we all have vulnerabilities. It's part of being human.
Right.
And when we try to deny or suppress those parts of ourselves,
Yeah.
we limit our capacity for connection,
Okay.
creativity, and joy.
So vulnerability is like the key to unlocking our potential.
It is.
Okay, so then how does that connect to Brown's definition of courage?
Right.
Because that's not what we typically think of, right? When we think about courage, we think about...
Yeah, she reframes courage in a way that's so empowering. She says it's not the absence of fear,
Right?
but rather the willingness to act even when we're afraid.
Mm,
It's about showing up and doing the hard things even when our knees are shaking.
I love that.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I think about times in my own life when I've taken a leap of faith,
Yeah.
whether it's like starting a new project or having a difficult conversation. It's never easy.
Right.
And there's always fear there.
Yeah.
But then there's this incredible sense of aliveness
Yes.
and purpose that comes from pushing through that fear.
That's exactly what she talks about.
Yeah.
She uses this great quote from Theodore Roosevelt
Okay.
about daring greatly,
Okay.
about being in the arena, even if it means getting dusty and bruised.
Yeah.
It's in those moments of vulnerability and courage that we truly come alive.
It's not about being fearless. It's about choosing courage over comfort,
You got it.
even when it's hard.
Yeah. Yes. And this idea of choosing courage is something that she applies to all areas of life,
Okay.
from our relationships to our work,
Yeah.
to our personal growth.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on what it means to be brave.
Yeah.
It's not about being some sort of superhero who never feels fear.
Right.
It's about showing up
Yes.
and doing the hard things, even when we are terrified.
Exactly. And that's something we can all do,
Yeah.
no matter who we are or what our circumstances are.
Mm.
It's about recognizing that courage is a choice we make every single day,
Yeah.
even in the smallest of moments.
So we've talked about vulnerability and courage.
Right.
But there's another emotion that Brown explores in depth,
Yes.
and that's shame.
Shame. Oh, It's powerful. It can be so debilitating.
It can be so heavy and isolating.
It is.
Almost like a secret that we're afraid to share.
And that's exactly what Brown says.
Yeah.
Shame thrives in secrecy and silence.
Right.
But when we share our experiences of shame with others, it loses its power. She calls this talking shame.
Okay.
And it's one of the most powerful antidotes to shame's grip.
So it's about finding the courage to break the silence and talk about the things that we're ashamed of.
That's it.
It feels scary.
It can be both.
But also kind of liberating.
It can.
Yeah.
But what her research shows is that when we dare to share our shame with someone we trust, we often find that we're not alone in our experiences.
It's true.
And that connection, that feeling of being seen and understood can be incredibly healing.
Yeah, this is making me think about all the ways that I might be like holding on to shame without even realizing it.
Yeah.
You know, it's so easy to internalize those messages of not being good enough.
It is.
Or not belonging.
It is, and it's something we need to be mindful of because shame can really sabotage our relationships.
Right.
And our ability to live a wholehearted life.
Okay. So it's amazing how like these seemingly negative emotions, vulnerability, shame, they can actually be catalysts for growth and connection when we like face them head on.
Yeah, that's the paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
The things that we try to hide or push away often hold the keys to our deepest healing and transformation. And this brings us back to Brown's concept of true belonging. Which she distinguishes from simply fitting in.
Yeah, fitting in feels like you're trying to mold yourself into whatever the group wants.
Right.
Whereas true belonging is more about embracing your authentic self.
Exactly. True belonging, according to Brown, is about accepting ourselves fully, imperfections and all, and having the courage to show up in the world as our true selves, even when it feels risky.
So with true belonging, you're not changing who you are to fit in.
Yeah.
You're bringing your whole self to the table.
Yes.
And the right people will connect with that.
Yes. It's about finding your people.
Okay.
Those who see you, accept you, and love you for who you are, not who you pretend to be. And this ties back to vulnerability, because when we're vulnerable, we're essentially saying, this is me, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of courage.
It does. And it makes me think about like those times when I felt the most connected to someone. And it's usually when we've both been really open and honest about like our struggles, our fears, our imperfections.
Yeah.
There's something so powerful about that.
Absolutely. And that's where the real magic of connection happens.
Yeah.
When we drop the masks and allow ourselves to be seen for who we truly are.
This whole conversation is making me realize how like interconnected all these concepts are.
They are.
Vulnerability, courage, shame, belonging. They all seem to like build on each other.
They do. They're like threads woven together to create this tapestry of a wholehearted life. And one of the most important threads in that tapestry is empathy.
Empathy is such a vital quality, especially in today's world, where it feels like we're constantly being bombarded with opinions and judgments.
Yeah.
How does Brown define empathy? And how does it fit into this framework?
So Brown defines empathy as the ability to step into another person's shoes. And feel what they feel without judgment. It's about understanding their perspective, even if it's different from our own. And offering compassion and support.
So it's not about agreeing with them or condoning their actions, but simply like trying to see the world through their eyes. Which can be hard sometimes, especially when we encounter people with like very different views or beliefs than our own.
It can be, it takes effort
and
intentionality.
It does.
It's about recognizing that everyone has their own unique story, their own set of experiences that have shaped who they are. And when we can approach others with that understanding, it opens up space for compassion and connection.
That reminds me of something Brown said about the difference between empathy and sympathy.
Oh, yeah.
Empathy is about connecting with the emotion, feeling with someone.
Yeah.
Whereas sympathy is more about observing it from a distance.
Exactly. It's about moving beyond simply saying, I'm sorry you're going through that. And actually trying to understand what it feels like to be in their shoes. And that can be incredibly challenging. But it's also where true empathy lies.
Okay, so how do we cultivate empathy in our daily lives? Are there like specific practices or techniques we can use?
One of the most powerful things we can do is to become better listeners.
How do we do that?
Really listen to what others are saying without interrupting or trying to impose our own views.
It's about putting aside our own agenda and like being fully present with the other person.
Right. It's about paying attention not just to their words, but also to their body language and their tone of voice.
Yeah.
And it's about asking clarifying questions to make sure we really understand their perspective.
And sometimes it's simply about acknowledging their feelings, even if we don't fully understand them.
Exactly. Sometimes the most empathetic thing we can do is just say, I hear you, I see that you're hurting, and I'm here for you.
So it's about creating a safe space for others to share their experiences.
Yeah.
Without fear of judgment.
Precisely. And that can be incredibly healing, both for the person sharing and for the person listening.
This makes me think about the importance of empathy, not just in our like personal relationships, but also in a broader societal context.
Right.
We're living in a time when there's so much division and polarization. It feels like empathy is more important now than ever.
Absolutely. And that's something Brown talks about quite a bit in her work.
Yeah.
She argues that empathy is the antidote to shame, to fear, to disconnection.
Okay.
It's what allows us to bridge divides, to build understanding, and to create a more compassionate world.
So empathy isn't just a nice-to-have quality. It's actually essential for creating a more just and equitable society.
Exactly. It's what allows us to see the humanity in others, even those who are different from us.
Right.
And to work together to create a better world for everyone.
It's like empathy is the key to unlocking our collective potential for compassion and connection.
You got it. And that brings us to another area where Brown's work has had a significant impact: leadership.
Yes, let's talk about Brown's research on vulnerability-based leadership.
Okay.
It's such a refreshing and much-needed perspective.
It is.
In a world that often equates leadership with, like, strength, dominance, and invulnerability.
Right. It is. She challenges those traditional notions of leadership,
Yeah.
arguing that true leadership requires vulnerability, authenticity, and connection.
So it's not about being the strong, silent type who never shows any weakness.
Not at all. In fact, Brown argues that trying to project an image of perfection can actually be counterproductive to effective leadership.
Why is that?
Well, when leaders pretend to have all the answers and never show any vulnerability, they create a culture of fear and mistrust. People are afraid to speak up, to share their ideas, or to admit when they've made a mistake.
It's like they're creating a wall between themselves and the people that they're supposed to be leading.
Exactly. And that kind of disconnect can lead to all sorts of problems, from low morale to poor decision-making.
Okay, so what does vulnerability-based leadership look like in practice?
It starts with the leader being willing to be open and honest about their own struggles and imperfections.
Okay.
They're not afraid to admit when they don't know something or when they've made a mistake.
So they're modeling vulnerability for their team.
Yes.
Showing that it's okay to be human.
Yes.
To not have all the answers.
Yes.
That feels so different from the command and control style of leadership we often see.
It is, and it creates a completely different dynamic.
Yeah.
When a leader is willing to be vulnerable, it gives others permission to be vulnerable as well.
Okay.
It creates a sense of trust and psychological safety.
It's like they're creating a space where it's okay to be real.
Precise.
To be authentic, to be ourselves.
And that's when the real magic happens.
Okay.
People are more likely to share their ideas,
right,
to collaborate effectively, and to take risks because they know they won't be punished for being imperfect.
It's about fostering a culture of learning and growth rather than one of blame and shame.
Exactly. And that's what ultimately leads to high performance and innovation.
This is really making me rethink my own approach to leadership.
Yeah.
Even in small ways.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about having all the answers.
Right.
It's about creating a space where everyone feels safe to contribute their ideas and to learn and grow together.
I think that's a powerful takeaway for all of us.
Yeah.
Whether we're in formal leadership positions or not, we can all benefit from embracing vulnerability and fostering connection in our interactions with others.
Okay, so we've talked about vulnerability, courage, shame, belonging, empathy, and even leadership.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we need to touch on before we wrap up this deep dive?
There is one more crucial element that ties all of these concepts together.
Okay.
And that's self-compassion.
Ah, yes, self-compassion.
Yeah.
Treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer a friend.
Exactly. And it's so important because we can't truly show up for others with empathy and compassion if we're not also extending those qualities to ourselves.
So it's not about being selfish or self-indulgent.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we are worthy of love and care.
Yeah, precisely.
Just as we are.
And it's about being mindful of the way we talk to ourselves, especially when we're struggling or when we've made a mistake.
Yeah, it's the opposite of that inner critic that can be so harsh and unforgiving.
Right. Self-compassion is about offering ourselves grace and forgiveness instead of criticism and judgment.
Oh, yeah.
It's about being kind and patient with ourselves, recognizing that we're all works in progress.
That's so important. But it can be really hard to practice self-compassion.
It is.
Especially if we're used to being really hard on ourselves.
It takes practice and intentionality.
Yeah.
But it's one of the most valuable gifts we can give ourselves.
Okay.
Because when we practice self-compassion, we create a more supportive and nurturing inner environment.
It's like we're building a foundation of self-love and acceptance.
Exactly.
That allows us to show up in the world with more confidence and resilience.
Self-compassion is the key to unlocking our full potential for joy, connection, and fulfillment.
So it's interesting how self-compassion can like tie together, everything we've been talking about with Brené Brown's work.
Yeah.
It's like it's the foundation that allows us to embrace vulnerability, practice courage, and cultivate deeper empathy.
Right.
It's almost like we have to start with being kind to ourselves before we can truly like show up for others.
That's a really insightful observation, and it speaks to the interconnectedness of all of these concepts.
Okay.
When we cultivate self-compassion, we're essentially creating this inner environment where vulnerability, courage, and empathy can flourish.
Yeah. It's almost like we're giving ourselves permission to be human, to make mistakes, to not have all the answers, and to still be worthy of love and belonging.
Exactly. And that's such a powerful message.
Yeah.
Especially in a culture that often tells us we need to be perfect to achieve, to strive for constant success. Right. Self-compassion is a radical act of self-acceptance.
So if someone is listening to this deep dive, and they're feeling inspired to like incorporate some of Brown's ideas into their own life, where would you suggest they start?
Well, I would say start small.
Okay.
Pick one area where you feel drawn to experiment with vulnerability, courage, or empathy.
Okay.
Maybe it's being more open with a trusted friend, or setting a boundary in a relationship, or simply practicing active listening with a colleague.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about taking manageable steps.
Yes.
Rather than trying to overhaul everything at once.
Right.
It's
like building a muscle.
Yeah.
We wouldn't expect to run a marathon without training first.
And be patient with yourself. Change takes time.
It does.
It's not always linear.
Yep.
There will be setbacks. There will be moments when you like fall back into old patterns.
Right.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. Self-compassion is about offering ourselves grace and understanding even when we mess up.
It's like being a good coach to yourself. Encouraging yourself along the way, celebrating the small victories, and learning from the setbacks.
Exactly.
As you start to experiment with these concepts,
I
encourage you to pay attention to what happens.
Yeah.
Notice how it feels to be more vulnerable, to act with courage, to extend empathy to yourself and others.
It's almost like conducting your own personal research experiment.
Yeah.
Seeing how these concepts play out in your own life.
And be curious about what you discover.
Yes.
What shifts do you notice in your relationships, in your work, in your overall sense of well-being?
Great.
This has been such a rich and insightful deep dive into Brené Brown's work.
It has.
As we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with one final provocative thought.
Okay.
We've talked about how vulnerability is the path to courage, connection, and a more fulfilling life. But it can also feel scary and risky.
That's true. Vulnerability requires us to step outside of our comfort zones and embrace uncertainty.
So here's the question for you, dear listener.
Okay.
What is one small step you can take today to embrace vulnerability in your own life?
It could be anything from sharing a genuine feeling with someone you trust to taking a chance on something that scares you a little.
Whatever it is, remember that you don't have to do it perfectly.
Right.
You just have to be willing to show up authentically.
Yes.
And to embrace the messy, beautiful journey of being human.
And who knows that one small step might just lead you to a whole new world of courage, connection, and joy.
This deep dive has been a great reminder that we're all in this together.
Yep.
Our imperfections are what make us human. And that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a strength.
It's a superpower.
So go forth and be brave, be kind to yourself, and embrace the power of vulnerability.
And keep diving deep. There's always more to learn and explore